Question: what is the primary means of written communication today in our professional lives? Correct. It's the email. And did you know that according to one study in 2018, the average business person sends approximately 43 business emails daily, not to mention the 97 messages on average they receive each day? If we want to be effective in our jobs, being able to write good emails is no longer just a nice skill to have. It's something we absolutely need if we want to be as effective as possible in our work, particularly in communication with our team members and others. So you get an email, and what do you find? Non-existent subject lines, having your name spelled wrong, being included on a totally irrelevant email. You finish reading and then wondering, what the heck does this person want me to do with this? An email itself seems simple, but there's actually quite a bit that goes into drafting a message that's clear, concise, understandable, and one that the receiver will actually open, digest, and respond. So let's look at some basics for improving our email and writing skills. First, the basics. Almost any endeavor requires the basics. Think for a second. There are 5 key elements to every work email you send: the subject, the introduction, the body, the closing and call to action. We'd like to get a response. And finally, the signature. But before we dive into all these individual parts, let's briefly look at some of the more general rules we need to follow in order to create an effective message. When you have a lot of information to share, it's sometimes tempting to send a lengthy message to your recipients. That's what happens with me sometimes. But here's the question. Would you read an email that was 1,000 words long? Well, if you're like me, when I come across a long article or email, like most people, I just skim it or don't even read it. Then when you throw in bad grammar, poor punctuation, hard to follow sentences, or mixed messages, we're even less likely to read and respond. Research conducted by email extension Boomerang states that the ideal length for an email is somewhere between 50 and 125 words. So here's what to do instead. Keep your email concise and focus on the matter at hand. Then end with a call to action, a requested response date, and make it clear that you're open to questions and follow-ups, if that's the case. But most experts agree the best emails aren't wordy. They're actually quite short. So here's the point. Let's make it our goal to keep our emails between 50 and 125 words. That way we'll increase the chances of getting a response. Because we receive so many emails each and every day, people aren't always willing to dedicate a ton of time and attention to our messages. There are dozens of others waiting in their inbox. Let me ask you, how many seconds do you think the average person spends reading somebody's email? Guess. The fact is, the average person spends only 11 seconds reading an individual email. Again, the point: short, direct sentences, line breaks, and bulleted lists is what we're aiming at. I bet you didn't know that the average person only spends 11 seconds reading an individual email. I didn't, which is why we not only need to keep things short, but also easy to read. So here's the point. Short, direct sentences, line breaks, bulleted lists will make it easy for our recipients to share the point of our message without needing to invest his or her full attention to understand your request. Here are some unwritten email etiquette rules we need to be aware of to ensure that we don't rustle and ruffle anybody's feathers with our written communication. First, start with considering who your audience is. Be conscious of who the recipient is. Only send that message to the people who actually need to receive it. We've all been copied on an email that has nothing to do with us. It's frustrating, and it just leads to more clutter in our inboxes. Email is not a situation where the more is the merrier. Quite the opposite. We should make a concerted effort to include only the people that absolutely need to receive our message. And if you're not sure how to tell who fits the criteria, ask yourself this question: what action do I want this person to do after receiving this email? So if you can't think of one single thing, it's likely that he or she doesn't need to be added to your recipient list for that particular message. Incidentally, if you need to send to a large group of people, make good use of that BBC address field. That's for blind copy. Doing so protects the privacy of the other recipients from O's on the email and spammers or hackers who frequently target those large unprotected lists. Also, check the spelling of the recipient's name. Have you ever gotten an email with your name spelled wrong or with somebody else's name? It happens to me. And it's obvious that the sender was copying and pasting the same message to numerous people. This turns people off. So, double check who you're addressing your email to before clicking the send button, and you're much more likely to stay out of the trash bin. Let me mention right here a great resource for improving emails and writing skills. It's called Grammarly, and the URL appears on the slide there. And it's described like this: from grammar and spelling to style and tone, Grammarly gives you and eliminates errors and helps you find the perfect words to express yourself. Check it out. So, we're reviewing our rules. Keep it short. Keep it easy to read. Keep your recipients in mind. Got it? Now that we have these basics under our belts, let's dissect what makes a solid business email, section by section. The first element, the subject line. Let's look at these elements one at a time. The subject line is often an overlooked piece of the email drafting process, but even so, it's important, after all, that it's the very first impression of your message. A bad subject will promptly land your note in the trash, while a strong one will improve the chances that the message will actually get read and responded to. Consider this your golden rule of writing email subjects. Listen, make the intent of your message explicitly clear from the get-go. Too often we rely on general subject lines, and I've done this too, like following up or just checking in. Not only do these give zero indication of what your email is actually about, but they also make it harder and tougher for the recipient to find the message later, because other emails may just use the same exact subject line, which is a bad one. So, how long should we make our subject line? When it comes to the length of it, this is an area where a slightly longer effort is actually better. Research from the Return Path found that subject lines between 61 and 70 characters have the highest read rates. That surprised me when I found that out. But it makes sense. Too much shorter than that, and you're likely not providing enough detail on your subject. Here's the point. After reading your subject, the recipient should know exactly what information or questions you're going to include in the body of your email. You're not trying to hook them with something catchy or cryptic. Make the purpose of your message painfully obvious. So, Congratulations. We've got our recipient to actually open our email. Now what? Well, they'll turn their attention to the start of our message, which consists of our greeting and introduction. And when it comes to the actual greeting, the exact wording you can use varies depending upon the circumstance of our particular message. This just came in from our Did You Know department. For what it's worth, a study conducted by Boomerang found that using a simple "Hey" yielded the highest response rate. Nobody knows your audience or recipient better than you, so use your best judgment. So, something like "Dear so-and-so" is more appropriate in a formal setting, while a friendly "Hey" is great for instances when you can be more conversational and relaxed. Either way, make sure to use that person's first name from the beginning of your message so that it's instantly apparent that it's personalized, not some bulk junk email. It's very important. Moving on to the introduction, common courtesy dictates that you should begin with something short and friendly, such as, "I hope you're doing well," or "I hope this finds you doing well," something like that. If the situation warrants, you can also follow that up with something a little more personal to introduce yourself and to reinforce the bond with that person. Something like, "I was thinking about you folks today." Here's the point. The operative word with the email introduction is short. It pays to be friendly and cordial when beginning your note, but spiraling into anything too long-winded only clutters your message and wastes your recipient's time. Remember, when he or she reads it, he's only going to take about, or she only going to take about 11 seconds. So you need to get to the meat and potatoes pretty quickly. Here's an insider tip. It's best to avoid asking questions in your introduction, especially like "What's up?" or "How are you?" You want your recipient to respond to the questions that actually matter and not to get confused and sidetracked with inconsequential small talk. An introduction like this one is way too long-winded and asks far too many questions that you don't really need answers to. If you ask an important question later in your message, it could be potentially overshadowed by all of this small talk, you see? Now look at this. A good greeting and intro. This is what we're aiming at. Short and sweet. Got it? Next, let's talk about the body of the email. That's the main message. This is where the action is, and another place where clarity is key. So here's some do's and don'ts. Don't fall into the trap of packing 8 different things into one email, as tempting as it might be. Your recipient will feel overwhelmed by all those seemingly competitive requests, which means they'll either push your email to the back burner or ignore it. But do make it your goal to include only one main point per message. This is interesting. Here's a suggestion. Use separate emails if necessary. If you need to send the details and agenda, for example, for an upcoming meeting, send it in one email with a relevant, clear subject line. If you need to check on the status of the graphics of the presentation, you can still do that, just in a separate email. And there are advantages. Segregating requests involves a little extra effort on your part, but in the end, it will make things easier for both of you. You won't get wires crossed, things won't fall between the cracks, and you'll be able to find those details later because they'll have that clear subject line. So, here's an example of a bad body. Check this out. It's been a while, so I figured I'd check in on the status of those graphs for the presentation we need to do for the board next week. Do you know when you'll have those done? Kate mentioned you guys were aiming for this Wednesday, but I thought it best to check with you in case that changed. Either way, you can let me know, okay? Also, we need one additional graph created. I attached the details for that one. Oh, additionally, I've attached the agenda and the notes for this Friday's meeting. Sorry it took me so long to pull those together. It's been a crazy week. Go ahead and look those documents over and let me know, or Luke, if you have any questions about them. If so, you should probably get those over to us before Thursday so we have time to make any adjustments necessary. Wow. Notice, even though that the language is somewhat simple and straightforward, these long paragraphs are tough to wade through. Now, this email format also included 2 separate items, which would be better broken up into 2 different messages. Bad body. But let's look at the good body. Let's check this out. It starts, I'm checking in on the status of those graphs for the presentation to the board next week. Are you still planning to have those wrapped up this Wednesday? Also, we need 1 additional graph created. And this new graph should break down the different marketing channels we use to acquire customers, which one was most effective in the 4th quarter. The data and more details about that graph are in the attached document. Notice they're bulleted. Finally, email element number 4. The closing, the call to action. Every business email you send has a purpose, right? You need to get to the recipient and get them to make an action, to respond. Whether it's answering a question, moving forward with a part of the project, sending you more information, or something else entirely. Yet, far too often we neglect to make it clear what we need our recipient to do. They read our message and have said, what? Okay, so now what do I do? Each and every email you send should end with a direct call to action. And if you're not sure what that should be, ask yourself this question. What do I need this person to do next? And you take that answer and you phrase it in a polite instruction. That way there's no confusion about what the next step should be. And this is another area where you don't want to get too vague. In fact, the more specific, the better. Sentences like, let me know what you think, or any questions, that doesn't make it obvious that you're anticipating that the person take action. So adding a call to action will make the email much stronger, but there's one more element you shouldn't skip, and that's a deadline. In addition to letting the person know what they need to do, tell them when you need it done by. As we come to the conclusion of our time together, let's talk about what makes a good call to action. A bad call to action would be, let me know if you have any questions. But a good call to action is, please look at pages 14 to 16 of the report and let me know by end of day on Monday if you have any additions. The signature, element number 5. The signature is another key part of our email that's often overlooked, despite the fact that it's included at the conclusion of every single one of our emails. So a signature in a business email should include the following: your first and last name, your job title in the company, your contact information, and a link to the agency's website or any other relevant pages. And that can all be accomplished in only a few words. Yet, including those details in your signature assures that your recipient has all the information they could possibly need. Here's some examples of good and bad signatures. Bad signature, and you all seen this. Best John. Well, or how about this? This is what we need as a good signature. Best John Doe, Director of Sales, Google, and there's the phone number. So there you have it, all of the necessary elements of a solid business email. But wait, before you send, there's one more thing we need to take care of, and that's proofreading. Take time to read through your email, top to bottom, to force your brain to pay attention to each sentence, because we're trying to catch any typos and errors. Additionally, check that any links that you include actually work and confirm that any necessary attachments are indeed attached to your message. If you're like me, sometimes you forgot to put the attachment in. Again, make use of that Grammarly resource. It's excellent. So when you've done all that, press send and give yourself a pat on the back. You drastically improved your business email writing skills. Oh, this is an important point I want to conclude with. Even if we use perfect etiquette in our email, there's still the chance that we won't get any response. And if we need it desperately, that can be frustrating. Despite the fact that we're all chained to our inboxes, we're not always speedy with a reply, and we don't always get the reply as quickly as we need. So here's some suggestion. Wait a reasonable amount of time. Some say at least 24 hours. And even for more urgent requests, sometimes it's going to take 3 or 4 days before checking in. Listen, if it's really that urgent, we need to pick up the phone. And we need to provide some context. Although a brief, just checking in on this message might seem effective, it usually ends up being frustrating. Have you ever had somebody follow up with you only an hour after sending a message and ask, did you get my message? Did you get my email? It can be annoying. Why? Well, we have to then scroll back through the other messages to get a refresher on what we need to do and why we need to do it. So, rather than leaving your follow-up message to a few short words, make sure to provide a brief reminder from that person that you need a response soon. Again, it'll make it that much more easier for them to respond in a timely manner. And that's all, folks. Listen, I have a simple outline that I can share with you summarizing everything that we've gone over. There's my email address. Now it's time for us to show off our phenomenal email etiquette.